Good evening. It's now 5 o'clock, and I call the workshop of the Victoria City Council to order. Our workshops are informal, so with that, we'll dive right into our agenda. We have one item on the agenda tonight, which is our 2022 maximum tax levy discussion. Our Finance Director, Tricia Pollock, will kick us off this evening. Ms. Pollock, hi.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Welcome to the 2022 budget discussion. This evening, we're going to talk through the workshop, the proposed 2022 max tax levy, and then we'll have discussion at the end with some specific questions that we have for you for feedback. But also, if you have questions along the way, just feel free to ask away. This is the third of our 6 meetings. That means we're halfway through. We're preparing that maximum tax levy for the adoption at the next meeting on September 13th. So previous council direction items that we discussed at the June workshop include the addition of the new full-time employee for a city planner, reduction in the fire permit revenue, addition of the tree replacement fees to the 2022 fee schedule, modifying some of the building permit fees, and then also the modification of some of the park donation fees. Items that have been brought back for additional discussion include the proposed FTE for IT services, the assigned fund balance deep dive, acceleration of future water reservoir, and additional investments needed to build commercial tax base. So the first item was for the IT service full-time employee. So in our efforts, we currently pay out in contract support and staff wages approximately $156,000 a year between what we paid to Atomic Data and our current staffing dedicated to IT. So for approximately $8,000 less, we could add 1 FTE to our staff, and doing so would provide us with a higher level of support and better ability to manage IT systems, the network, and infrastructure proactively. Gives us a more intimate knowledge of our network systems and a better control of the quality of work and the activity. We've currently been working on ways to bring down what we have been paying. So we've eliminated already in-person support. We made some changes to reduce the level of support, again, for cost control measures. And so we no longer have that single point of contact. We have to work through the help desk exclusively, which means that we get someone that may or may not be completely familiar with our environment or our systems. So we're only able to achieve cost savings by increasing the time that we have our city staff spending on support. So this means that every IT-related call first goes to an email to city staff for triage, and we've taken away the ability for other staff to reach out to our help desk for support. So they're going through that point of contact with staff first. And we've also changed the thresholds for our monitoring. Non-security related alert only addressed during core business hours to reduce overtime charges. So while we could continue with some of these cost control strategies, for as much technology as we utilize to deliver services to our residents and businesses, this approach is operationally not the most efficient. So when city staff are taking on more IT-related roles, it's taking away from their ability to achieve other roles that we had initially hired them to take care of. So we're also leaving a lot on the table. Essentially, we're maxing out our ability to move the needle forward with IT delivery, like automation and integration and security enhancements. So this is something that staff believes would be important for the city to move forward with.
I have a question.
Yeah, of course.
So that the 156,000, whatever it was, does that before or after some of the cost reduction efforts that you just highlighted?
So it's a combination because this goes through July. So that 100 and almost 4,000 that we had spent from July 20 to July 21. Through that process, we were reducing those costs. So it's a combination of both.
Mayor, members of the council, one thing I'll add to this as well, if we would have stayed on our current plan and our current trajectory is what level of service we wanted in our contract, we would be pushing the 180 to 190,000 just to atomic on the current path that we were at. So that exceeded our budget, and so we had to put cost control measures in. We were very cautious and deliberate in the types of controls that we want because we wanted to maintain the security and also the last year's investment with our newer switches and server environment. What we've done essentially is take away our ability to be more proactive in some of those things and delay the response. So as Tricia noted, with all these different things, it just becomes more difficult, and you pay a little bit more money when you're going through the help desk system because you have a person who's not familiar with your environment, so you're paying, and when we pay per minute, which we do under this contract, then you're paying for them to learn your environment, to read the documentation and come up to speed so they can even be able to be in a position to respond to what your needs are. So we did some calculations on, do we keep that person in that account, that person, one person contact, or we felt that at the rate that we were utilizing IT services, that it was better at that time for cost control measures to go to the model that we did. But we don't think we can do anything more than where we're at without really reevaluating our whole IT delivery and IT services.
I understand, yeah.
Yeah, so I see the need for it, but I guess my question comes around, some of the things that you talked about to me seem like a business analyst type role versus a IT manager that's planning strategically for the future. So I just want to get an understanding of,
Yep.
Are we trying somebody to handle incidents?
She's the business manager.
No, but from an IT perspective,
Oh, okay.
right?
So you
From an IT structure perspective, forward planning from an IT perspective, or someone that's handling tickets, break fix type activity.
Okay, so you're asking if they're more like a.
Yeah, I just want to understand, right? Because we're hearing about the calling of the IT desk. That seems like it's like a break fix. Something breaks, you call, you get it fixed. Versus strategically planning, we need to make sure that we are incorporating this new security patch, this new
So, Councilmember Hebert, members of the council, one of the things we hired Atomic to do for us was to help us be that strategic planning, help us with our capital projects. With these cost-saving measures, we have eliminated that from our contract. So you basically have your staff, so it's Trish, Alyssa, and me who are serving in that role today. None of us are IT professionals. We know enough to be dangerous, but not enough to move the needle forward in a proactive way. And so we would still need to be relying on some sort of services to help us if we maintained a contract at that level to make sure, we're preparing for those replacements in our network infrastructure. So there's certainly break fix things, and that's mostly what we're looking at here, but there's also those strategic things, being thoughtful and planful about replacements, about changes in technology, about leveraging. You know, we use a lot of technology in the city, and so how do you leverage that investment to make the most of it? For example, Laserfiche, we're just scratching the surface on that. So how do we make sure that our finance system is connected to our Laserfiche system? And you do that through what's called APIs and paperclips and other things. And then those systems are able to talk to one another across all our platforms, which allows us to automate, streamline our business processes. So we're very limited to be able to really invest further than what we're doing today with the resources that we have today. So we envision a position that's going to help us with the capital and the strategic planning piece, also help us with the annual budgeting, also help us with the network and security environment, but also help us with the break fix things. So it's a kind of like a wears all hats.
Okay, that makes sense, that we have that strategic view. It's not just fix something that's not working. It's forward looking.
Very much so.
Yeah, I mean, excuse me, my initial take on this is this would be a hybrid position to start. We're not shooting for somebody that's got 15 or 20 years in this industry or somebody that's right out of college. We're trying to fit in that 5 to 7 to 10 year range where maybe they haven't led their own department but want to at some point, because this is the starting point for us to have our own department. And in 10 years, we could be another 5,000 larger in terms of population. We're going to need this as a starting point at some point. So in my opinion, it's not a question of if we're going to ever do this, it's just when. And I think the cost breakdown and the cost breakout kind of pleads the case pretty well that we're at that point now, to me anyway. And so I want to make sure that the only question that I have and that I see is that getting this person up and running, how much of a troubleshoot are they going to have to depend on Atomic for it to get up and running, to understand our system?
Councilmember Gunderson, Mayor, members of the council, we have been spending the better part of the last year and a half documenting our systems thoroughly. And so there's always going to be a learning curve, just like bringing on any new position. Our network environment is relatively new. So back in 2019, council graciously advanced us the funds to be able to do the work that was planned in 2020 to start addressing some of the failing and aging infrastructure and security gaps that we had. So we've addressed those, and we've basically started with a whole new network environment. And so from that, we have been thoroughly documenting everything. We have it all mapped out. We have kind of a guide on where we want to go. So there'll certainly be a learning curve, but hopefully a professional that, like you said, Councilmember Gunderson, maybe not somebody fresh out of school, somebody that understands and can get up to speed quickly. We certainly are looking for some, because we don't have that technical expertise on staff. We need somebody that's going to serve in that capacity so we can wean ourselves off and make that transition as quickly as possible for greatly reducing, with the goal of eliminating Atomic for support altogether. There'll probably be a transition period of some sort. The one thing I'd also like to note is that we do have a job classification system, and we do have a consultant, DDA, that we work with that provided that service to us when we did our classification study back in 2019. When we have needs, we run through and say, here's what all of our needs are, and we put them in, and there's a whole ranking system that kind of spits out what that position looks like based on what your needs are. So it's not us just saying, hey, we think it's this title and this thing looks great. And there's a very prescriptive process when we're creating positions that help us identify what that correct fit is.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item, council?
I do have just
Yeah,
one.
go ahead, Councilmember Hebert.
Sorry. So the contract with Atomic, what does that look like for the next fiscal year? Is that something that's
So, Councilmember Hebert, Mayor, members of the council, we have an annual contract, so it's a year-to-year contract. We've not started negotiations with them for the new. So if council were to say that you would support us moving in this direction, we would start to have conversations, and that contract would look a little bit different for next year than it does this year.
Thank you. Anything else?
Just one question.
Yes.
If we need to pay a little more, because it looks like the average is a little more than that, are we okay in our budget?
Councilmember Black, Mayor, members of the council, this is maximum tax levy, so we anticipate that we're going to continue to look for ways to reduce the budget. We're feeling pretty comfortable that it's a fairly conservative estimate. And so we feel confident that this position should not come in more than that, but until it actually goes through the job classification process, it could be where it's going to fall in our grading class system. It could be less, it could be more. If it's more, we'll have to look for other opportunities for savings once you set your maximum tax budget.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Ms. Pollock, please continue.
Thank you, Mayor. The next item that we have for discussion is the unfunded projects contingency transfer. So historically, the council's has included a transfer from the general fund that could be used for projects that come up throughout the year and were not planned for or budgeted for, or expenditures that might come in higher than were expected. So for example, since our last insurance renewal, it's in April, the rates can increase beyond what was projected. So the contingency would cover that additional expense, which currently is about $4,500. So we would anticipate using a portion of that $80,000 to cover that unbudgeted amount. However, if council is no longer comfortable with this approach, staff is recommending assigning it at the end of the year if there's any funds available. So we could look at possible uses at the end of the year if it's a factor. So let's take a look on the next slide. So if we eliminated the $80,000 transfer from the 2022 budget and assigned fund balance from 2021 for emerging needs, it does reduce the levy. And we won't know if any 2021 funds will be available until April. So it does kind of limit the flexibility that we have to respond to emerging needs for unplanned projects. So I guess just for an example, today when I talked to Alyssa, who is currently working with our IT, she asked me about some needs that we have some Windows 7 still that need to be taken care of. There's some security issues that came up just today with our water treatment plant if we aren't able to upgrade those. So, for example, that would be a need that I would recommend her to talk to the council or Dana about using some of that contingency for.
Trish, the $80,000, now remind me, is this part of that? A couple of years ago, we had set aside about $60,000 because we had some insurance concerns around that. Is this different money?
This is different. So on the next slide, I can show you what that is. So this
But
has.
Before we move on.
Yep.
That $80,000, what's the magic about $80,000? Is that just a number that comes by some kind of calculation, or is it just a number we sort of pick out of the air?
Yeah, I mean, it can be adjusted for sure, up or down, either way. It's just kind of where we've landed on what we've found that have come up as projects in the past. So historically, that's been kind of the maximum that we've had to use. Back on our slide from 2020, we used primarily it went for IT security enhancements. Again, some of those needs we don't know about in advance because world of IT is so ever-changing. So these things come up that are very expensive. Yes, Judy?
Councilmember Black?
Yes.
I had a question. So what we're doing is we're taking 80,000 from the budget of the next year and using it now? Is that what you're saying?
So what it does is it allows us to have that flexibility to assign those funds to a certain expenditure. So when something comes up, we know that we have the 80,000 set aside for those instances. So then we don't come up short to achieve our 30% fund balance at the end of the year.
Okay, so we're just keeping it at 80,000. We're not, at the end of the year, if we've only used 20 of it, we would only have to fund 20 back into it to keep it.
So,
Is that what you're
yes,
saying?
Councilman Member Black, Mayor, members of the council, that's correct. So the money's still there. If we don't use it, it just still stays into fund balance and you can assign it to another, maybe you want to transfer it to parks or trails or long-term street maintenance, kind of similar to what council did with the fund balance that was left at the end of the last year. And we were able to fund the purchase of the fire truck at that point. So the funds are there if we need them for those emergency situations, but if they're not needed, they will be, then council will make a decision on where we should spend those funds.
Councilmember Gunderson, you have.
Is there potential to use the federal funds that we may be receiving? You may talk about this later, so I might be jumping the gun, but on this particular account item, can the from the last round of stimulus that we're receiving, can that be used to fund this account balance?
Ms. Hardy? Says no.
There's rules on what we
No,
can.
no, I know. I just didn't know if this was one of those things that it fell under, that we unassigned or stuff that just comes up.
No.
Which
No.
to me makes sense, but I guess not. Okay.
Council, good? Ms. Pollock, continue. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. This just is showing at the end of last year what council had approved for those assigned fund balances, which was including that amount that Mayor, you had asked about the legal and the risk management, which we do have at the bottom of this page at $40,000. So this just is showing some of the items have already been spent, such as the Carver County GIS invoice that was payable to Carver County at the end of the year, and then also some fiber invoices that we have already paid out. So there's still a few items that we have in there for risk management and have not spent, but may spend before the end of the year.
Trish, if you want to run back to that.
Yep, sure.
If we don't spend them to where they're like a risk management legal and we find a different use for that $40,000, what's our process on that? Does that come before the council or is that money that you guys can spend at your discretion?
Yeah, good question, Mayor. So what will happen is at the end of the year, when we get all of our expenses in, we will take a look at where we went over, where we went under, and then we do bring that to council then to show what has been spent. So, for example, if we were to go over in our legal, we would reduce that by that amount. Say if it was $10,000 that went over, then we would come back for the end of the year and reassign that to $30,000 and then ask for your approval. So that also, so that gives the transparency. So this will all come to you, but it won't come until March, late March, early April, after we've had all of our auditors here.
Thank you.
The next item that we have is the acceleration of the construction of the new water reservoir. So since this is part of our interfund discussion, or our enterprise fund discussion, sorry. We're going to have a detailed discussion in November. But currently, this project is scheduled for 2025. So the earliest that it could be constructed, according to some conversations we had with Kara, would be 2023, and that's if we start design in 22. So we're going to have some more information to bring to you in November after we get some more information from the engineering department. And then the last item brought back for discussion is the additional considerations for accelerating the commercial tax base expansion. So some of these things listed here, we're already doing or planning for staff, and recommend continuing with these types of approaches and giving yourselves the flexibility to respond to opportunities and emerging needs. So the investments that we make in policies and studies and visioning are all a part of this this commercial tax base expansion that that Councilmember Gunderson had asked about at that last meeting. So some of these things are the attending the conferences, and they're low cost, high impact efforts that staff is able to go out and be on site and participating in cohorts and getting information and building relationships and trying to get those types of opportunities for the city of Victoria that we all would love to see happen. So we are working on that, and if there is other money that you feel is necessary to set aside for these efforts, we're open to any of those recommendations as well. So there's a couple of new items that have come up since the last workshop, and one of them we did include in this max tax levy that we're presenting, and it was for $40,000 for elections. This is the cost impacts for redistricting. So there have been some legislative changes, and then with the census and the population changes, there could possibly be some needs that we need to, at least we feel we need to include in our max tax so that we are prepared to pay for those, such as the election judges. There were some legislative changes to the requirements for secure storage for election equipment that we'll need to consider. Voting machines, all of those items can add up to quite quickly. So we did set aside in there the $40,000 for that. And then the next item is the implementation of the space needs study. Since that was a recent workshop that was presented to council, we have made some financing plans to try to pay for those that have been recommended pertaining to the short-term needs of the fire station renovation, and then also to start to prepare for the fire station land purchase. The fire station land purchase, we are recommending to do an interfund loan payment, likely from one of our other funds, and then we put in a $100,000 transfer just to prepare for like a payment back for that if we were to find some land to purchase. So we just want to make sure that we have the funds available to make that purchase if we are able to find that land. And then the build out of that fire station, that we were recommending using some of the fund balance that we have in the capital facilities fund And then also redirecting, there was a $300,000 transfer plan to the trail fund. And since the Bavaria Trail plan has changed, we were recommending then this year taking that transfer and then using that so that we could pay cash for that renovation to the fire station.
Councilmember Black.
Yes. Taking the trail fund, even though we're not using it, we have other trails that have to be done.
Councilmember
Park and Rec's going to feel about that.
Councilmember Black, Mayor, members of the council, yes, we do have other projects that are being planned, and I have received some of that information from the park director, and she has given me a timeline, and it still fits into those plans that the Park and Rec Committee had prioritized. Those projects were much less expensive than what this Bavaria Trail was for that. So those funds, we feel we could still redirect and also pay for those trails that they are prioritizing as important to them. So,
are we going to give that money back at some point? Or is it just not going to be in the trail fund anymore?
so Councilmember Black, as they prioritize and plan new trails, I wouldn't say it's a payback. It's just that we would probably in future years then look at directing a different amount of funds or more funds. That it really kind of depends on what they come up with. What they have in their plan right now, we have enough to cover. So
On all those trails that they need to connect?
all of the trails that she has presented are in our long-term financial plan, and I have in our for future transfers to that fund and are able to pay for those trails currently.
I think at some point, though, we're still going to want to do Bavaria Trail, hoping that at some point we'll still be able to do that, and then we'll have to be raising the tax levy to complete that trail because we've spent the money elsewhere, so.
Yeah, I'm not too keen on taking.
What about, how does that impact CIP projects that they might have as well?
So,
So if we were to take the money out of the trail and use it elsewhere, you still have CIP projects.
so other CIP projects as in other park projects or other,
Not park, not trail, the park.
so.
Or is it completely separate?
Yeah, so Councilmember Aber, yes, they all have their own fund, and there is a transfer that goes into their fund to allow them to pay for their projects. We set up those transfers each year based on what our directors bring to us as far as projects and needs. None of those projects or needs are approved by council at that point. We're just in the planning stage, and that's why then this fall, we will come back and present what has been recommended. Since this is the max tax, we are just trying to make sure that we can cover what we know so far. If other needs come up, normally they're farther out so that we have a little bit more time to come back and plan for some of those. So as you talk about, like, we would still like to do Bavaria Trail, and and we're aware of that will likely be a need going, in some years from now, and we will have to plan for that. But at this time, we feel the best use of those funds rather than just hold it in a fund balance when we don't have it on our priority list. It's better use of those funds to pay for something that we could do with the renovations and paying cash and able to do those.
I would agree. I mean, I don't think our taxpayers are fond of us sitting on money waiting for an opportunity to spend it. I think they want the money to be used as we have. So I guess I can understand that. All right. Ms. Pollack, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. So we've always planned for and are asking council to consider accelerating the plan for hiring a utilities superintendent. Now, while this is not an impact to the levy, we just thought it was appropriate to bring it up during this budget discussion. Funds are available to have the opportunity and align with this new position. And we've realized that even more in the recent weeks with the watering ban and the water reservoir needs likely being escalated earlier than what we had anticipated, that we feel that it's time that we look at adding this position now sooner than later. This position would oversee all of those water conservation efforts. They would assist in that design with the water reservoir project. And also, as we talk in November about going towards that transition to monthly utility billing, this position would be a great addition to assist with that process. So, again, this will not affect the max tax, whether you agree to adding this position or not.
This position has been planned for, though,
Yes,
and we're just accelerating it. From do we know what year we plan to do this position?
2023 or 2024 is, we had it fluctuating, and the trigger being that design for the water reservoir.
So now we need
Project.
them now.
Thank you.
So, I mean, so if I'm understanding, this position, if we accelerate the reservoir, we're going to need to accelerate this. Would that
Councilmember
be how I think
Gunderson,
about
Mayor, members of the council, I would say you can make a greater impact by accelerating the position. It's not a necessity, but you can make a greater impact by having this individual come in at the ground level, where they're part of the planning, part of the discussions at the beginning and on the front end of our transition to some of the other operational things that we're seeing. We've learned a lot over the past 8 weeks with our water treatment plant and operational efficiencies, how to get the pumps moving and all sorts of different things, that if we would have had this position, this level of expertise in-house, which we've got great water plant operators, we've got a fantastic field team. We don't have somebody that has this specific technical expertise on staff. And so we definitely, with some of the challenges we've seen recently and the ongoing challenges, and especially as we shift focus to conservation, as we start looking at water reservoir and working with our developers on some of these reuse systems, so which is becoming more and more unpopular, we have to tap out external resources to do that level of review for design and feedback during our planning process. So having this person, now we certainly see the operational benefits of that, and which is why this was in part of the planning stages for 23/24. But I wouldn't say they necessarily go hand in hand.
But they could.
But they absolutely could, and there would be a big operational benefit.
Okay, I got a bunch of other questions. We'll get to that discussion.
How does this affect, so we've talked about a few different new positions. We've talked about space needs, right? So we have plenty of room for new people, obviously, then too.
Councilmember Roberts, Mayor, members of the council. So we do have space in our water treatment plant, although there's not, it's shared space. So with the council's the direction or the path that you're going down with authorizing us to start the fire mezzanine build out, we would build space that where this person would be housed as well. And there's synergy with the different things that are happening there with some of the things that we talked about at our space needs discussion earlier.
Council, other questions? Ms. Pollock, continue.
Also not affecting the max tax, but we like to bring this to council every couple years. It's whether council would like to make changes to their wages. Any changes would need to be approved by ordinance by October of '22, which would be before the next election, and would become effective after the election on January 1st of '23. Currently, salaries are slightly higher than our market city averages, but I do have more detail about what those cities are on our next slide. So these are our market cities, and then Victoria is in the blue, which shows it's just slightly above the average. Any questions?
Council, thoughts on this?
I was surprised when I saw that because I saw where Chanhassen had increased and they're up around 12,000 for the mayor.
Janice?
Yeah. And they did it a couple of years ago.
That's like Eden Prairie level.
Yeah.
I would favor us keeping steady on these wages considering where we are with our market study or with our market cities. I would favor keeping it where it is. Any other thoughts, council?
I agree.
All right, Ms. Pollock, carry on.
Thank you. So with the couple of questions that you had about the American Rescue Plan Act, we did include a little bit of information, even though, again, it's not affecting the max tax, but we just thought it would make some sense to include it in part of our discussion. So at your last meeting, council passed the resolution authorizing the acceptance of the federal funding from the ARPA, and the city did receive its first half in July, and we will receive the other half next summer. Eligible uses, in summary, are to respond to the COVID-19 public health emergency or its negative economic impacts, respond to workers performing essential work during the COVID-19 emergency by providing premium pay to those eligible workers, or by providing grants to eligible employers that have eligible workers who perform the essential work. The third one is for the provision of government services. So that would be in relation to the revenues collected. So it would be like a revenue reimbursement for lost revenues during the COVID-19 emergency. And then the last one is to make necessary investments in water, sewer, or broadband infrastructure. So there is additional guidance released to define these uses further. These are fairly broad in their description, as you can see. So staff is researching all of those detailed definitions, and will come back to council with recommendations in the coming months. A special revenue fund was also approved and set up at the last meeting, was included in that resolution. So we will use that fund to track these revenues and expenditures in detail. So there also is a longer time period that we are able to use these funds. So we want to make sure that we come back to council with good recommendations and make the right decisions, so you can make those right decisions on the best uses for these funds. The time frame of the use of the funds actually began in early March when it was passed by the president, and it ends in the end of 2024. So you could have until 2026 to pay for obligations that are incurred by that 2024 due date as well. So if you had a larger project and those funds were already under contract with a contractor and the project wasn't done, you still have that extra time to pay out those funds, which is very much the opposite of what those CARES funds requirements were with such a short time frame to spend and and expend those funds. So since we have that additional time, we just want to make sure that we're bringing you the best information that we can. So the max tax levies need to be approved by council before the September 30th each year. So the final levy also cannot be higher than whatever we approve in September. So city staff does continue to discuss, refine. We're still getting information from the county as far as fiscal disparities. They're a little bit behind this year due to the census. They're waiting on information from the census and calculating numbers. So we are still waiting to see where all of that comes in. So we're trying to, what we've done is prepared what we feel to be the maximum tax levy for you to consider. So these are the updates. The new updated projection is 5.29%, which is slightly lower than what we had projected at the June workshop. It's about 1.19%. So the current projected tax rate is essentially flat with the 2021 tax rate with this projection, which is like 32.26%. Which is 32.26% of the 1% of what the city can levy. So as we talked about at the beginning of the discussion, staff's presenting a proposed max tax levy increase of 5.29%. This shows what we had for levies the last 2 years, and then our projected levies for that, which are in our long-term financial plan. This doesn't mean that your property taxes will increase 5.29%. This is the percentage of the increase between what our levy was last year and what it is projected for 2022.
So, Tricia, because we add taxable properties every year, how much does that increase our levy just by adding those properties to our tax rolls?
Mayor, members of the council, yes, so we did have a slide, I believe, at our last workshop that did show a portion of what our new construction is versus what the market increase was. And I'd have to go back and look again at that information, but I believe it was more than 50% of what our increase is was due to the new construction.
And then we also had an increase because of market values. Is that correct? Am I remembering that right?
Mayor, yes, the market value increases affects the tax rate. It has no impact on the levy increase. So the levy increase is just going to, is what council can control. So that tax rate, like I said before, the county is still working up some numbers. That tax rate could change. But whatever you approve for this levy increase will not change with what the county numbers come in at. So yes, the value of the homes do matter to the residents because that's what their taxes are based off of. But that tax rate is going to be driven by the county. Yes, Dana?
Thanks, Trish. Mayor, members of the council, I do have a note from the last presentation in June. The new construction will absorb 68% of the levy increase. That's $234,000 in new taxes generated by people who are building and coming into Victoria. The value added is $72.4 million. So the people who are coming into Victoria are, of that PPI, they're taking 68% of that levy increase. That leaves roughly 30% for the existing taxpayers to cover that increase.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes,
so
Councilmember Roberts.
I am by no means a math major, so this may be a dumb question. So just making sure I understand. So the big increase in the projected rate from 2022 to 2023, that's looking at projects that are on our, like in the right, like that's why the increase from 5.29 to 11.1. Is that correct?
Councilmember Roberts, Mayor, members of the council, yes. So that projection includes what we would anticipate bonding for the Downtown West project, because if that project goes next year, like we anticipate, we would begin making bond payments in 2023, which would increase the levy by a significant amount just for that bond payment.
So, again, maybe this isn't how it works, but so, I mean, do we think about in having that, instead of having that big increase of trying to meet in the right, so increase maybe a little bit more this year so that next year isn't a 6% increase? I don't know. Is that doable? Is it something that cities do? I guess I'm just wondering.
Councilmember Roberts, yes. We definitely like to try and keep our long-term planning steady. So this also, we're projecting our tax rate as well to stay, at a fairly even keel when we're looking forward. It's just a little bit more difficult to even out those numbers when you have a bond payment that's going to be upwards over $200,000 annually. Because then, as you see in 24, we already have that $200,000 increase built in throughout. So then it doesn't show that we have that increase again, because you're going from year to year. So if your increase was, it was 5 million and then it went up to 5.5 million, now we have a $500,000 difference, but then now it's already in there. So the next year, if it goes up to, 5.7 million, we already have that bond payment in there, and then we only have a $200,000 difference, and then your percentage is much smaller. So it's always going to be higher in that year that you add a large project for your debt service, and then it'll even out after that. But those larger projects like that definitely have an effect on that levy increase.
Ms. Hardy.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Roberts, Mayor, members of the council. Some of the things that is not reflected on this chart yet are we're still having conversations with our department heads and looking at their capital plans, the CIP, not only for this year, but those future years. And so we, just like you, we don't like seeing those large spikes. So we will continue to work with the department directors to see what kind of projects can be delayed, what kind of purchases can be delayed, and then we look at different strategies as well. So what kind of street projects are coming, what kind, all those different things. That's one of the benefits of doing the multi-year long-term planning. We're looking out 20 years. So as we start to look at what our needs actually are, we can start having those conversations, and having this information now helps us to have more productive conversations with the department directors to say, look, there's just not an appetite for an 11% increase next year, so we really need to take a closer look at what this is going to look like in the future. So we will continue to have those conversations. We just haven't had the 2022 conversations yet. So we suspect that next year, this 11.1% is going to be something lower. We hope. That's the goal anyways.
Councilmember Black.
Yeah, because don't we have a lot of road construction coming that's going to be in the millions?
Yeah.
I mean, in the next 10 years, isn't it like 60 million or something like that?
Yes.
So I don't see it dropping.
Councilmember Gunderson.
But the planning that we're talking about, that we've talked about in our goal to get to a more diverse commercial base with residents aren't reflected in these numbers, correct? This is at current 98% homeowner, and I'm using 98% because everybody talks about 80% of the budget, but between fees and property taxes, 98% of our budget comes from people that live in the community, right? So what we're trying to do and what we're trying to work towards is to drop that percent that the homeowners are paying, that businesses will make up. It's not charging more taxes, it's diversifying our base so that the commercial base is higher than what we currently have,
Right.
which helps homeowners. I can speak for myself, and I'll only speak for myself, don't like taxes just as much as the next guy. I can understand trepidation on us raising taxes and people seeing that we increased our budget. But what I hate more than anything else is piss poor planning. And if we're not planning accurately and then we hit another 2008, then our city is in a deficit because home values are dropping. And when home values are dropping, why didn't you know that? Why didn't you plan for that? Well, we had that conversation, but we decided we didn't want to raise your taxes. So now we're stuck in a hole and we're another 12 years away from something that we want to do.
Right.
And that in and of itself is annoying to me in the long run when a good city like Victoria that has a bright future, if we're not planning to actually do something to get taxes lower effectively in the long run, that's just going to it's just going to set us back if something happens. And I'm not trying to be a pessimist in that respect. I'm just saying we're planning now for the next 10 years. And that's where this gets us. I get it. And I'm willing to, and I have, and we all have, when people see the dollar signs go up. But it's to plan for the future. And I can go into a whole bunch of other analogies, but I won't spare everybody.
Not thank you for not, but
I'll take it either way.
Dana, can you talk a little bit about when we got the CARES Act funding? We got quite a chunk of money this year from that first CARES Act funding, and we accelerated some projects. Can you talk a little bit about the effect of that on the budget and how we should be thinking about that?
Yep. Mayor, members of the council, great question. When the CARES Act funds and then some of the savings that resulted at the end of the year last year from the better than expected revenues and operational cuts resulted in larger than we normally would see savings at the end of the year beyond our 30%. So the combination between the things that we were able to accelerate that would have otherwise been in the 22 budget and those savings, you all acted earlier this year in assigning some of those things, our levy would have started at 12% this year, a little bit over than 12%. So those decisions and those spending allowed us to be at this. We came in June at 5.48%. I think it would have been like 12.1 or something like that if you would have not made those decisions and if we would not have accelerated some of the things that we were planning to do in 2022 because of those better than anticipated savings, higher revenues, and because of the CARES Act funds.
Is there a formula that cities use generally to say, for lack of a better word, like a cost of living increase? So just right off the bat, everything's going to go up 3%. We think so. Is there a formula like that?
Yeah, Mayor, members of the council, there's not a magic bullet or a formula that cities use. So when we talk about it, you heard us talk about this a lot in our preliminary budget. We talk about current services. So a lot of cities, including Victoria, will start at what is it going to take next year to deliver the services that you are receiving today? That's our starting point. And so that's how we start with all of our budget conversations with our directors on what is it going to take for you to do what you're doing today next year to a greater number of people. So communities like Victoria who are growing and experience the rate of growth that we are, we have a lot more budget pressures than, say, a community that's fully built. Now, not saying that they don't have budget pressures, they're still seeing the cost of doing business going up, your wage pressures, your health care, your unfunded mandates from the state, those types of things. You're entering into multi-year contracts, and so those contracts are going up at 5% or more. You're seeing things like salt prices, materials prices go up, and those things are being reflected into the cost of doing business. And so we always start with, what is it going to take to deliver what we're doing today next year? And then we look at our strategic plan, and that's why it's so important to have a vision and a plan, because then we're not constantly, jumping to that next, shiny new thing. We have a plan, we have a vision. It's something that we all agree on, and you're holding staff accountable for executing that plan. Your residents or your constituents are holding you all accountable for executing that. So there's accountability built in that. But that strategic plan gives us the, why are we doing this? And if you point back to say it's going to move the needle north and allow us to do, bring in more businesses or, do these things that we've identified in our strategic plan, it makes that conversation a lot more palatable, broadly.
Council, other feedback?
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Just going back to how some all this kind of ties together in our long-term planning regarding this year's budget. We asked about moving up the water reservoir, and then adding a position of the utility superintendent. We have ARPA funds that, from what was listed, seem to be able to be used for a water reservoir, which is wonderful. My question is, how does accelerating all the, and I have answered it a little bit on my own, but this all seems to play into a longer term plan that helps us get to a point where all of a sudden we can make that impactful cut, and a year where maybe there's it's not flat, it's actual a negative, right? Which taxpayers would love to see.
Right.
To me, that's a hell of a goal to get to. And I think knock on wood, we're getting to that point where we've planned enough. We have these goals. I mean, we're not sitting there shooting at a dartboard. People are telling us what they want. We all talk to different people in the community. They all want stuff. And our reaction is always, how much you willing to pay for it? The worst conversation I ever want to have is if we don't have enough money to make trail connections or crossings safer, and somebody goes, why didn't you make it safer for my child who died? And it wasn't in the budget. That's the worst case scenario. And that's what I want to avoid. So personally, I'm all about accelerating our water reservoir, hiring utilities, using those ARPA funds to get us to a point where we can work towards the place where we want to be with our commercial base, which is our goal, which is downtown west and down farther towards the tracks as the utilities get put in, over time. So for me, this makes sense to continue to do this, to carry out the plan we've talked about and to work towards it, and to make sure that the people in Victoria understand we're not just doing this. We don't enjoy this, saying you got to pay more. We're trying to get them to a point where we're paying less in the long run. And while we, the five of us and city staff, get to see that played out, it's our job to make the residents understand that's our goal. And that's why we plan, that's why we're here. And hopefully that's why they elected us and in the long term. I'm rambling because I'm on some pretty good medication for my cough, but I'm just really passionate about this community, and I know nobody likes to see their bottom line go up. But I also get feedback, how come, people who either just make the blanket statement or don't understand why aren't governments run like businesses? Well, because we have taxpayers, and you have to pay taxes. You don't have to utilize a business. So if you want us to act like a business, we'll raise prices for you all day long. But we have to justify what we're using the money for, and if it makes sense. And I think we're doing things that make sense, not only now, but in 10 years, we're going to look back and be happy with that result. So.
Councilmember Hebert? You're good? Are we,
We can follow that.
Derek said it all. He used up all the words. Ms. Pollock, do you have more slides to go, or are we?
I have like 4 more slides.
Oh, yeah, let's go. Let's do them.
I thought that was a conversation. I'm sorry.
This slide just summarizes what's in that projected 6.6 million 2022 levy. So debt service is up 108,000 due to the savings that we realized in 2021 for the refunding of the city hall bonds. That just makes that difference higher due to that savings that we realized in the previous year. The transfers, we're seeing the reduction due to the savings to the transfer in the long-term street maintenance fund because of what we had mentioned earlier with your decision on the 2020 year-end transfers. And also includes the elimination of that $80,000 unfunded projects contingency fund transfer.
This includes eliminating that?
Councilmember Black, Mayor, members of the council, yes. Staff did reduce that with the recommendation of assigning any leftover funds, if there are any, into an assigned fund balance. So
The idea is that we would have some dollars available for unfunded emergencies.
that's correct, Mayor.
Okay. Ms. Hardy, yes.
But I'll add, thank you, Mayor, that you won't know that until April of next year. So you're banking, the risk that you're taking is that there'll be some sort of savings. And, you know, here, our department directors, yes, we do very well at managing to our budget, but they're encouraged and do a great job always looking for opportunities to save even after the budget is adopted. And so we generally, you won't always, the goal is to get to 0, but we generally strive and encourage for savings. And so the risk that you're taking is that if there is not savings in any particular year, you would not have the flexibility that you have today, the way that we're doing it for those emerging needs, unless you're making shifts or cuts to other things that you've put in your budget for next year.
Councilmember Black.
So what you're saying is that these numbers are based on not having the $80,000 unfunded?
Councilmember Black, yes, that's correct.
Yeah,
Did we decide that?
that's what staff is recommending. And I think based on the year that we've had, that we've had more revenue than we suspected, that staff is suggesting that we're not going to need the 80,000 and will be covered for any contingencies. So, and I would.
Oh, because of the,
I would go ahead and accept that recommendation.
okay.
That we not,
But next year we'd have it back?
we could.
You could consider that.
Okay.
I mean, those funds, the $80,000 and the risk, where it's not detrimental risk, right? This would have been nice to do, and it would have been nice to have that $80,000 to do this now. We don't, so now we just have to plan for it later.
So
Or plan for it to do it later.
Councilmember Gunderson, Mayor, members of the council, that's, yeah, essentially correct. So there's times, you know, maybe we meet with a developer and they want to do a road study or a traffic on something that we haven't thought about. You know, I'm throwing that out as an example. So that would be something where we'd either have to look to make shifts or delays in other things if that money were not available. If we did not have that unfunded contingency, and we didn't get that savings that we anticipated, so we would have to look at other ways to fund those things or delay them to the next budget year.
We have options. I think if there's a great opportunity that we have options on how to take advantage of a great opportunity without,
I don't know, I like having my little stash.
we do have a stash. It's called a fund balance. So,
Mayor's got like 70 cents right there.
yes, I do.
All right.
That's right. I lost a
So
bet.
there's an
I lost a
emergency
bet to Councilmember Hebert, so that fund balance is
Did you see
gone.
him?
Yeah, that fund balance is gone. Ms. Pollock, before we get completely off track, please.
So in the city's general fund, this slide is showing how that $6.6 million is divided up. So 38% of funds are personnel related, wages and benefits, since the majority of our operations are service related activities. Increases in personnel costs are typically a component in the general fund needs. Current expenditures, 33% include contractual services such as IT, prosecution services, city attorneys, GIS services, sheriff services, as well as other costs for equipment, fuel, vehicle maintenance, utilities, or insurance premiums. Those are all included in there. And then the debt service payments are 16%, and transfers to other funds for those, as we discussed, long-term street maintenance, capital facilities, public works equipment, fire equipment. That is about 13%. So now, as we get ready to transition into our discussion, here's just a point of reference. So as you consider adding or decreasing the funding, you know how those decisions impact the levy. So it would take approximately $332,000 to of cuts to make the tax levy flat zero. And then 1% is $60,000. $6,000 would be a 0.1% change in the levy. So the items we would like your feedback on include, so whether or not to increase the number of FTEs, to include the IT position and the utility superintendent position is the first item.
Okay, you want to just take these one by one?
I think that might be easiest, yeah.
That sounds great. Council, so the first item we're looking at is increasing the number of FTEs to include that IT position and the utility superintendent. It does not have an additional impact to the levy because we are just redirecting the funds for the IT position, and the utility superintendent is already funded through the water fund. So, discussion on that. Is everybody in agreement that we would like to include those two positions in the levy?
Two?
Seems like a no-brainer to me.
Is it two or three?
Councilmember Black? Two positions.
You had already given direction, Councilmember Black, Mayor, members of the council, on the city planner. So ultimately, the increase
Two more after this?
would be
Okay.
for 2022.
Perfect. All right. So even though we've got Councilmember Gunderson off coughing, we have a majority. We have a majority. So terrific. The next item is the use of general fund transfer of trails for the fire station mezzanine build out. And this is a $300,000 cash transfer. Council, thoughts on this?
I would be in favor of it. I don't think it should just sit there just in case, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
I think the mezzanine needs to be done, and if this is,
There's needs and wants.
Yes. Councilmember Black?
Fire station is in need, so I guess.
and it sounds like from what we said, right, the things that are in the hopper right now would still be funded anyways, so it's not taking away from, based off of what we're being told.
And, yeah, I would be in agreement with you. I think the opportunity to find the money for the Bavaria Trail, should it become an opportunity again, is there. Councilmember Hebert?
I'm agreeing.
Yeah. Councilmember Gunderson, got anything to say about this? Good. Great, terrific. So we will, yes on the fund transfer and the mezzanine build-out. Next item is the increase in the elections budget to account for the costs and possible new precinct. Remind me, Ms. Pollock, what the $40,000 was that? Or-
Mayor, yes, $40,000.
That's a question I have. I'm trying to, maybe you covered it before, so it says here possible. When will we know that we do need a new precinct, or they changed, or what? Maybe you covered that. I'm sorry if I missed it.
At April or May, that
Okay,
we won't know until 2022.
okay.
And that, at that point's when the boundaries get redrawn and then we decide. But because of our increase in population, we can safely assume that that's probably going to happen. We're probably going to get a new precinct.
Yeah.
Is there a best practices on how many people in a precinct, or is there a rule or a law?
It's changed because of the mail-in or absentee voting. So there used to be like 2,500, but now they don't go on that at all because there's precincts in Chaska that are 4,000.
Okay.
So, but last year, half of it was absentee almost.
Do we decide that, or is that told to us by someone else?
It used to be told, but now it's more,
We decide it.
yeah,
Okay.
kind of.
So
I mean,
if
we
don't
did-
need it, we can put it in the unfunded.
Yeah. There's no hard rule from the county coming on that.
Okay.
And it is, I think, because the technology is changing and more people might be absentee, but but the security is the big one now. They want it in a locked area for the 2 years. So that's going to be the more costly one, I would imagine.
Council, other questions on this?
I would just say that when it comes to the elections, we can hang our hat on Victoria in their turnout. And so even if it's mail-in or in person, we're going to see an increase, and probably still will need, like the mayor says, another precinct. So I would be for it.
All right. Other questions? Okay, I'm seeing thumbs up on this for everybody. All right, go ahead and include that. The elimination of the $80,000 contingency transfer and assigned fund balance at year end, if funds are available. I am in favor of getting rid of this contingency based on our conversation a few moments ago. Any other thoughts on this?
I'm in agreement.
Okay, Councilmember Hebert? Okay, so I'm seeing that that's a thumbs up on the elimination on the lower rate. And then the last thing on this slide is the increased budget to account for unplanned or emerging needs related to commercial development. Remind me the amount on this that we were looking at.
Mayor, members of the council, we did not give a specific amount for this item. We kind of left that open because it's not in the max tax levy. If there is an amount that council would feel comfortable with, we could suggest $25,000 to have for that type of a need. However, that's entirely up to the council, and it would move that needle, as we showed in the last slide. $6,000 would be a 0.1% levy increase. So that's entirely up to the council if you would like to increase it.
So my question is we have a couple of funds that are related to development. I'm thinking about our revenue stabilization fund. Should we have something like that comes up, can we utilize the money in that revenue stabilization fund? Ms. Hardy, Ms. Pollack, who's on?
We were just trying to decide
Yeah.
who's going to take that one. Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. The Revenue Stabilization Fund, you have a policy, and we think based on the feedback and the scrutiny that's on those types of revenues is a good policy, and that currently, council, you are restricting that use to building permit related activities. And so there may be some opportunity, depending on what type of commercial development projects, initiatives, expenditures, or needs there are, to utilize those funds from there. Trish, would you mind just going back to that commercial development? There's a few things I just want to remind council that you're already doing, that's already included in this max tax budget. Some of them, I'll just point out, so we're not spending a lot of time on this, but just point out some of the things that you've already budgeted for that have the financial component to it. So you do have some development funds in the community development for planning related activities. We don't know what might come in, but we do set aside so the community development, our planners, our community development, economic development director can respond to the types of development needs or initiatives that are coming through. And we do have money. We have a consultant that is on staff and works with us on different types of policies, on expertise as needed, on an as needed basis. So we would suggest that you continue to fund those things, and that's appropriate. We also, at no cost, continuing to seek opportunities to host workshops and panel discussions to just grow our breadth of knowledge, put our name on the map, meet with potential developers. Those are all good things that we can do that high impact, zero cost. And then memberships. So memberships in the Urban Land Institute, again, making those connections, memberships in the professional associations and in like the National League of Cities would help us learn, network, and bring what we learn and hopefully investment along with it back to our community, opening up doors that we currently don't know are available to us or that aren't currently available to us. So we do have money in professional development funds for both council and for staff to attend those types of events. And so there's, those are built in to the, and have been for a long time. So we would suggest that council continue to fund those types of things. And so as Trish noted, for this, we thought we put everything in here in max tax that we thought was appropriate. And if there are things that we are missing or things that are specific beyond what's on this list that council would like to do, now would be the time to include that as part of your max tax discussion, or just to include a number so we can continue to flesh it out. You can always reduce that in December for your final budget.
That policy around the Revenue Stabilization Fund is the council's policy, so we can make an exception to that policy or change that policy if we have an opportunity that we feel is something we don't want to miss out on. So we do have that. Is that correct?
It is your policy, and so yes, council, you can change that policy at any time.
Okay. My thought on this, council, considering that we've built in some of these things already, and we do have some of those funds that we can direct for other opportunities that might be unforeseen, I would.
Yes, it seems a little open-ended to me.
Right.
Without knowing, if the five of us don't have something that we can tell the city and the taxpayers that this is what the $25 is for, then I don't think we should be. Unless there is something that we can think of and we collectively agree, then I'm all for that discussion. But it seems open-ended.
Comment would be, I guess, is right. I mean, this isn't final yet, right? And once we make the decision on what the max tax is going to be, we can't go up. Right. So is it smart to put in a little buffer right now and say, okay, let's look at, whether it's $10,000 or whatever, and then that gives us some time to like, okay, we want to dig in and look and see, is there something else? Give staff some time to look in, and is there anything else, so that if there's not, then great, we can come back and say, no, let's lower it. But we can't add to it, so do we want to use that now to say, let's look into this a little bit more, let's maybe put a little bit in there so that we can always drop it if we need to, but we won't be able to go back up if we all of a sudden someone finds something that, hey, this would be a good idea to do.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
See, I think we have funds that we can call on, and we make that decision at the time we've got an opportunity, rather than saying, maybe we.
A couple of funds we can dip into.
It
just makes things tight. I mean,
it's a fair point, but at the end of the day, my stance is still the same. At the end of the day, if it comes, when do we have to decide on December?
December.
Right. If by December 15th, whatever that date is, we don't have something concrete, then.
Right, but we can't go up.
Right, I know. I'm saying, to your point, saying you have a good point, okay. Right? But again, when we decide, we have to have something concrete.
Absolutely, I absolutely agree on that point. So, I guess I don't know if we want to hear from Derek, because it kind of seems like we have a little bit of. I don't know. Is there three people that say don't increase? because to me, I'd be for putting a little in there for now and saying we can always take it away if by December we don't.
Let me ask the question to Dana. Thoughts, Dana, on, should we add something? Would staff do some research and say, here are some uses you could do with $10,000 or $25,000? Would you, is that what staff would do based on this conversation?
Mayor, members of the council, I think in this situation, if you were going to leave it a little bit open-ended to allow, what we would do is come back to you with a plan. It would essentially be a communications plan or some sort of plan that said, here are all the initiatives that we feel that we can reasonably spend our time on, reasonably predict that would enhance our commercial tax base expansion efforts. Everything that we would then look at doing would tie, just like every other budget item that comes before you, we would make sure from a staff perspective, we're tying every recommendation back to advancing your strategic priorities.
Based on that, council discussion?
I'm fine with it. I mean, you just took away $80,000 of a buffer, so you need something a little where somewhere.
I mean, we just talked, right? And again, Derek's not here, so, but, he talked about how this is our big goal, right? Is to expand the commercial, our commercial base. So if, you got to sometimes spend money to make, right? So I just don't want to leave any stone unturned, basically, if, like I said, we can always, if we don't have a good plan, right? If the city staff doesn't say, no, we're good with what we already are investing in, then we can drop it and just right. But to me, it just gives us more flexibility.
And I do want to make sure that we've got bandwidth from a staff perspective to do some of these things as well. So, Derek, I'm going to give you a 30-second catch up here. We are doing, the final thing is, do we want to add any additional dollars to, for any kind of development opportunities? We're already doing the things that are on this slide, and we don't have a definition of what we would, a number, nor a definition of what we would do with those dollars. But we're talking about if we would designate a certain amount towards max tax and then have staff bring back some kind of a plan. And we could either adopt that plan and put it on our max tax, or we could, if we didn't care for the plan, we could drop it.
So we're already doing these things.
We are already doing these things, yes.
Okay. If we do that, I would want to see what the impact of the things we may do that aren't on this list. What's the impact to what we're doing?
And that's what
that what-
staff would be bringing back a plan. Conversation around, do we want to designate maybe $10,000, and then staff would say, here's what we would do with that $10,000, or $25,000, and here's what we would do. The other thing we talked about was the fact that we do have some additional dollars in other funds that if presented with an opportunity, we could discern at that time whether we wanted to spend the money.
So essentially could that be then, if we don't use the funds that are there, then be assigned to that other fund that we've effectively eliminated?
The unfunded one?
If I think I'm following your question, I think there's two answers to that. If you are thinking about waiting until seeing what kind of savings we have at the end of the year, in April, we would bring you, here's the amount, and here are some, essentially doing the same thing. We think there's opportunities, but you wouldn't be raising your tax levy to do that now. You would be using that with potential savings that would come from better than achieved revenues and staff continuing to look for opportunities to reduce the budget throughout the year. Again, the goal being a zero budget, but we historically have come in a little bit better than budget. So you could make that decision about what funds and how much get used for dedicated towards focusing on expanding our commercial tax base. The other thing would be if you raised it now and 10,000, 25, whatever that number is, as part of your maximum tax budget before your final adoption in December, we would bring back a plan that says, in addition to all these things that are already included in the budget, we feel that we reasonably could spend X amount of money on these activities that would move the needle forward on your strategic plan priorities as it relates to expanding the commercial tax base. And if we're not able to achieve that, or we're not able to find specific uses this year, whether it's a lack of capacity, manpower to do that because of other priorities, or those opportunities aren't there, then our recommendation would be to reduce the budget.
I mean, let's just see what the list, I mean, potentially could be.
Okay,
It's-
we're going to direct staff to do some work on it then.
I mean,
Do we,
Do you have to give them a number, though?
I think we do. I think we do, because we're
what's,
gonna,
Mayor, members of the council, just to help facilitate your conversation, a 0.1% increase to your tax levy is $6,000.
0.1.
Can you go to that slide?
0.1 of 1%.
So you're at 5.29% right now. If you gave us $6,000, you'd be at 5.30.
That begs the question. This is where now we're tasked with trying to find that magic number with what does 6,000 get us? What does 12,000 get us? What does 18,000 get us? If we're going to go 0.1, and are we going to say $15,000 does what? I mean, that's,
That's what we're bringing back to
Yeah,
you.
you choose a number and then they would say, okay, we only need, if we say 18,000, right? They say we only need 6 to do these things, and then we can lower it, right, by that amount, right?
So do we have to come up with an amount today?
Yes.
Because they need to know
we're on
what
a
they can do
timeline.
with that amount.
we're on the clock by
And we're also-
September 30th.
And we're also looking at max tax. So does anyone on council, I personally would be in favor of doing the things that we've already done and waiting and see what we have left over in the budget. I know we are a busy, busy staff, and we have a lot of stuff going on, so it's about everything staff can do to do what we've already planned and react to the things coming in. And I would favor us looking at the opportunities that are brought to us, deciding if there's a part for us to play, and then looking for the money at that point in time, whether it's from savings from this year and fund balance that would carry over. So that would be my thought, but I'm open to other ideas.
Actually, I agree with you.
Okay.
I think in 6 months, we get to do another planning session, right? Am I wrong on that? I mean, would we do another planning in February, similar to what we did, another visioning?
Councilmember Gunderson, Mayor, members of the council, yes, we will do an annual all-day workshop to revisit our strategic priorities. But if you were looking at, as the mayor suggested, waiting until we understand what our savings looks like, that opportunity would come in April.
But with something like this, we'd be able to say, okay, we didn't do this last year. We didn't add to the levy because for whatever we thought it might do something. But the all-day workshop, we've identified these other things. Then we can spend next year planning for those to add in. And we wouldn't necessarily need those because we've already identified we're acting on last year's workshop, right? To say, this is where we're going and this is the money we need to go in that direction. So I would agree. I think we've got our plan moving forward, especially if we accelerate some of this other stuff. That's a lot of work.
We have a lot to do.
But we all need to be understanding that there's no magic pool of money anywhere if we don't create a fund for ourselves. So if we say, I want to do this, we can't do that. I can't do that. I mean, I'm like now that I can breathe, I'm like a little sheepdog. I want to do this, I want to do that. But if we don't do this, we can't do that.
Okay. So
That's kind of the argument of, sorry, I know we don't have a whole lot of time. That's kind of an argument in putting money in there, right? Just to get a look at what we could do, right?
well, and I think we could direct staff to tell us what we could do at some point in time if we do have some savings in the future. If we said, now we have a sure amount of money or a certain amount of money that we say, what are things that we wanted to accelerate? And what does that look like? So yeah, Ms. Hardy.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. May I suggest, you don't have to act until, we are currently scheduled to bring a maximum tax budget for your adoption, consideration of adoption on September 13th. Between now and that time, staff, with your permission and direction, staff could go take a look at this and see if there's anything that jumps out at us, and we could come back to you with a number as part of your presentation on September 13th if we think that there's something that we reasonably can get to that's going to move that needle forward. So just something for you to consider.
And then you would bring back,
A specific number with a specific use.
I like
I would
that
be
idea.
for that.
You should have said that 10 minutes ago.
All right, so does staff have what they need from council to carry on?
Yes.
All right. Any other final comments on this before we close out the workshop? No. No further discussion? May I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.